Hey, good Wednesday evening to everyone. We're glad to have you with us for another Wednesday night class discussion. We're moving further and further along in our daily reading and hope that you're keeping up with your daily Bible reading. We're really getting into the heart of a lot of the narrative of ancient history with the Hebrew nation, and especially with some of these characters and the intrigue in the kingdoms of David and Solomon and all the family matters that took place and different things. But today we're kind of moving in a new direction. The reign of Solomon lasted for a while. He was not quite as good as his father David, which isn't saying a lot, but in the overall scheme of things, there was a time of grandeur and greatness and peace under the reign of David and Solomon. But now that's come to an end. And the new kings, the sons of Solomon, come in. They were just some swell guys, weren't they?
Well, it's interesting that a copy of a copy of a copy is never quite as
good as the original.
I would say accurate, good. It doesn't have the same clarity, and that's kind of what happens. David was an excellent king. We focus on, obviously, that horrible episode with Bathsheba, with Uriah, and that really made him kind of limp to the finish a little bit. But other than that, David was a great leader for the people. Solomon started off that way, but because of his far-flung interest, particularly when it came to women, he listened to the wives that he had. And he started,
and concubines,
and yeah, probably not them as much as the wives, but he started to worship other gods, and it led to a dual loyalty, which Jesus says no man can serve two masters. And Solomon tried to do that. He tried to serve the Lord, and then to also serve some of these foreign deities that his wives had brought to the court, and it didn't work that way. There's a word called syncretism, when you try to take a couple of disparate systems and bring them together. I see that all the time. You'll see some Hollywood starlet and say, well, I was brought up in the Jewish faith, but now I've become Buddhist. So now I'm Jewish Buddhist. I'm like, you might as well just say that you're nothing, because you're either one or the other. Yeah. And Solomon tried to have one foot in the temple of the Lord, and then one foot in the temple of these other gods, and it didn't work. So by the time that Solomon's son, Rehoboam, comes to the situation, the decision's already been made by the Lord that he's had it with this. He would have done that during the lifetime of Solomon, but for the sake of his father David, he decided not to take the kingdom, or to tear the kingdom, if you will, from his grasp. So if you remember, Rehoboam comes up, and there's a pivotal decision. And I don't think that the Lord forced his hand or anyone else's hand in this situation. But you remember the situation. Rehoboam brings the elders of the nation together, those that have been through the tough times and the difficult times, who had the experience. And he asked them a question. He said, now, what do I need to do to follow in the footsteps of Solomon and David? And the old men basically said, just lighten up a little bit. Your father has taxed everyone to death. People they can't breathe, they can't get up, and they just need some relief from this. So then he makes a mistake, and who does he go and consult?
He has the bright idea. You hadn't seen nothing yet.
Exactly.
You think that was taxes?
And he got that idea, if you remember, from his contemporaries. He went and talked to the millennials and the Gen Zers of his day, and they said, you tell those old people to shut up, you're going to really make things hard. And at that point, the nation was at a tipping point. And, to your 10, so Israel, if this is the way it's going to be. And Jeroboam was already fanning the flames of dissent and discord. So the kingdom divides, with Judah being in the south and Israel being in the north.
Right.
Now, we're engaging in a little bit of stereotype at this point, and I had a professor when I was at Michigan taking a history course. Professor Haywood had the best white man's afro that was gray you ever saw in your life. It was like Dr. J, circa 1975. But he always said this. He said, "I'm exaggerating to make a point." Well, we can exaggerate and make a point, but generally early on, the nation of Israel to the north was far more idolatrous than the nation of Judah to the south. You had the handful of good kings generally predominating in Judah.
Right.
You almost can't find a good one in the northern kingdom of Israel.
A procession of bad ones.
Precisely.
Suffice it to say, we are entering into that period because of the divided kingdom. As you said, it was relative stability under David and Solomon. Those were the golden years of Israel, a united kingdom. But now divided into those two camps, Judah and Israel, and a lot of little subplots underneath that because of the tribes. Vis-a-vis, God sees the need to usher in a time of spiritual leadership through the prophets. And so tonight we want to talk a little bit about the prophets, and we're going to see a procession of those as we continue on in our readings. But the first one coming through is Elijah. And before we jump into Elijah, in the time allotted for us tonight, we may not be able to do justice to all of the things that signify this great prophet of God. But talk a little bit about prophecy in general and what that means.
Well, some people today, when they hear prophecy, they're always trying to figure out end time scenarios. I've noticed some of our churches, neighboring churches around us, we're having a seminar on prophecy. And that always means,
Armageddon.
Who is Gog and Magog, and when is Armageddon going to happen, and when's the rapture? Okay, forget about premillennialism. If you look at 2,000 years of Christian history, premillennialism has been around for about 1.5 of those 21 centuries. So it's relatively recent vintage. The reason that it's recent is because it's mistaken. As Marshall Keeble said about premillennialism, pre means before, millennial means 1,000, ism means it ain't true. So there you go. So when we're talking about prophecy, we're not talking about people predicting the end times vis-a-vis Revelation and Daniel and Matthew 24. That's not what we're talking about. The prophets that are extant at the time that John is referencing with the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are generally men that God raises up to go and announce his message, to the people, and or B, you might say, to the leaders.
8.1.
8.1. And then the leaders are especially significant here because basically, as goes the leadership of a nation, so goes the nation. And something
not a lot has changed on that, by the way.
You think? I mean, that's really the same thing that you could say today.
Yeah.
And Elijah comes to the scene at a particularly crucial time in Israel's history. Now, dig, if you will, the picture, as Prince says.
Oh my.
Up to the north, you've got the city of Samaria. Samaria quickly becomes the capital city of Israel, whereas Jerusalem remains the capital city of Judah. Well, it doesn't take the nation of Israel to the north long to start making entangling alliances with kingdoms and duchies and fiefdoms around them. For instance, King Ahab becomes the most notorious of these.
Pretty wicked.
Because he marries whom?
Jezebel.
Jezebel was a daughter of Ethbaal, the king priest of Tyre and Sidon. And if you remember the cities of Tyre and Sidon, they're right on the coast of the Mediterranean, extremely wealthy kingdoms because of trade, because of a maritime trade. They brought in ships, they brought things in, they sent things out, and these guys just made money hand over fist. Well, of course, Ahab wants to marry in with that. John, have you noticed something? We see this in the royal family in England because Americans just can't get enough of these inbred folks, unfortunately. There's a reason that God doesn't want you to marry your cousin 8 generations over, and you don't want to know about that. Look at the Windsors or the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, as their German name actually goes.
You'll appear on an episode of The Crown.
I'm hopeful. I know my royal history. So when you get these people, they become unbelievably pretentious and entitled. And it doesn't take the northern kingdom of Israel long to do this. So when Ahab comes over there, he already thinks he's better than everybody. You remember when the Lord is warning Israel through Samuel, you don't want to do this. You don't want a king. No, we know what we want. Okay. Well, H.L. Mencken had a line that said, democracy is the theory of government that the common man knows what is best for him and that he deserves to get it good and hard. That's kind of what you could say about the kingship in Israel and in Judah. You get these guys, they are out of touch with the people. They don't care about God, generally speaking. They are elitist and they set themselves up separate and apart from the people. Well, this becomes worse when Jezebel comes in because she doesn't even give lip service to the Lord.
No.
She serves the Baals. Okay, Baal is her man. That's her God. That's her deity. And she doesn't care if this is the religion of the realm. She doesn't care that most of the people in Israel still believe in God and still want to serve him. She's like, I'm in charge. This is the religion of the country.
Absolute power corrupts.
Absolutely. Thank you, Edmund Burke. And Ahab is so weak. Basically, anything she wants to do, she's going to do it.
Yeah.
So the Lord can see what's happening. So, as John mentions, enter Elijah the Tishbite. Elijah is basically the polar opposite of everything that Ahab has become.
Yeah.
He's not cultured. He's not finely dressed. He doesn't have courtly manners. Elijah's the kind of guy that comes in and says, hey, get it together, okay? We're not having this anymore. And, well, how dare you speak to me that way? Ahab is all about culture. He's all about protocol. And Elijah is all about serving the Lord.
And one other thing that Ahab is all about, he's all about trying to, can I say kiss up? Is that appropriate to say to his wife, Jezebel?
Absolutely.
So he was under her thumb and squirming to kiss up to her. So the situation tonight then that we want to focus on is this figure, Elijah. And a significant figure he is, because a lot of the things that he does, we'll talk about a few of them in just a minute, foreshadow, if you will, another significant figure that will come on the scene hundreds of years later. And that is the Messiah, Christ. And so Elijah enters into the picture. He talks to King Ahab. He tells him about what's going to happen. There's not going to be rain for a number of years. But I want to pull up a couple of things about prophets. First of all, you mentioned already, most people think that a prophet is one who foretells the future. Gene Dixon, if you will. I see Nostradamus, you know. But that's a part of it, no doubt. God reveals to the man of God, and the man of God tells things perhaps that are going to happen in the future. That's a part of it. But what we really want you to understand about prophets, and we're entering into this period of several significant prophets, is that they speak forth for God. So not so much foretelling as is forth-telling. They speak forth for God. And that's exactly what Elijah does. And as you said, in a pretty direct manner.
Think about it in these terms. If Elijah were here today, he would not necessarily fit in with the broader culture. He wouldn't care about fitting in with the culture, but he would have a message from God. What might that message from God be today? Read your Bible, pray, go to church, obey, quit being greedy, help your neighbor, okay? Tell the truth. All of these things, these were the messages that Elijah was delivering to the people, but they had gone so far off the rails that he needed to remind them who they were and maybe who God was. They were, who God was. Exactly. No, that's okay. So he comes in and he has a message, and the message is, let's go back to what we were doing before.
Let's get back to the old path. Let's get back to the God of our fathers. Let's understand, as you said, who he is and vis-a-vis who we are as a result of that. And so not only does he speak forth a very powerful message in no uncertain terms to the powers that be, King Ahab / Jezebel, but also to the people. And in addition to that, the prophet had the reinforcement of the message by doing some mighty works and, if you will, miracles. We read here in the narrative of Elijah where he is taken in by this widow woman, and she has a son, and the son dies, and she's understandably distraught about that. And Elijah prays to God, and God restores the dead son to life. Oh my, what does that remind you of?
You know, there are some parallels there. And while that will have an impact on a handful of people, there's something that he does that will have impact on more than a handful of people. He says, at my word, there will be neither dew nor rain for the next several years. Okay, you declare a drought, all of a sudden you got everybody's attention. From the greatest to the least. That's not going to affect Ahab any less than it is the person who's farming trying to scratch out
And
a
I
living.
think it did affect Ahab,
Sure it
because as is the case today, sometimes the message of God will draw people closer to him, and sometimes the message of God will drive people further away from him. Ahab interpreted that as an indictment against him. Oh, you're going to sick your God on me, huh? Oh, you've pronounced a curse against me. And as a result, Jezebel had a little something to do with that. Elijah was on the run. He was hunted.
It tells you something about the determination and the toughness of Jezebel, that once Elijah declares the drought, he goes into hiding, because he becomes at that point a marked man.
Persona non grata.
He stays away from the royal court. He stays away from Ahab. In fact, the next time Ahab sees him, he looks at Elijah and says, is that you troubler of Israel? And he says, I haven't made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have, by abandoning the Lord and by serving the Baals. So he says to Ahab a question, and you could just hear Elijah saying this to people in America in 2021. How long will you waver between two opinions?
Yeah.
If the Lord is God, then serve him. If Baal is God, then serve him.
Well, how are we going to find out which one is really God?
Well, that's interesting that you would bring that up.
Be able to test this theory?
Yes, there is. We will have the Hunger Games, and we will go out into the wilderness, and we'll go ahead and we'll prepare a couple of altars, and we'll put sacrifices on the altar, and the God that answers with fire, then he is God. And the people say, yeah, that sounds good.
And not to steal the thunder, we all know the story so well, as most of these stories now, we're getting into that section of the Bible where a lot of these narratives are so familiar, and I'm sure that there's going to be a great sermon coming down the line that we can give all the flavor and color to this. But suffice it to say, for tonight's discussion, this is the ultimate litmus test. In many ways, God of Israel, the true God of the universe, of creation on one side, and these false gods of Baal, of pretense, of comfort are on the other side. And let's have a showdown. Let's just see what's what. And so the prophet of God proposes this test. Ahab, Jezebel are all in on that. They call in the prophets of Baal, kind of a stacked deck against one guy, kind of the same David and Goliath odds that we talked about earlier. But that's fine with God, because God in one is a majority in any scenario. And they propose this test, and all day long they're praying, the prophets of Baal, to God.
Cutting themselves, bleeding out.
Elijah's having a little fun with them. Well, maybe he's asleep. Maybe he can't. So they would cry out louder.
Yell louder. Maybe he's taking a nap.
And nothing happens. Finally, to prove the point that God is God, Elijah soaks down the wood of the altar with water until the water runs down into
Fills
the
up
trenches
sure.
and everything. So now it's his turn. And he prays this prayer. You can read about it there in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 22 and following. And God hears his prayer. And the prayer is not, show them that I'm a true prophet, show them that I'm the big cheese, but show them that you are God. Reveal yourself to them. And God does that in a wonderful way. The fire comes down from heaven. It consumes the offering. It consumes the wood. Chuck, it laps up the water that is pooled up around the altar in trenches, so that there is...
This isn't a magic trick.
No.
This isn't done by sleight of hand.
Not at all.
Beyond the shadow of doubt.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt, and the prophets of Baal are defeated soundly, so much so, not only are they embarrassed and defeated and humiliated in that act, but there's a slightly harsher penalty that happened to them.
Elijah says, go find them and kill them. Okay, because of their role in turning the people into idolaters, the penalty for blasphemy, for idolatry is death.
That's it.
And it's signaled out. And if Hollywood were making a movie about this, which I'm sure it never would, you would end here and they all lived happily ever after.
Yeah, right.
But did they?
No.
What happens when Jezebel gets the news about what happened to her boys, the prophets of Baal?
Well, you got to step back and remember, she wasn't too happy about the fact that they were, even having this contest at all. She just wanted Elijah killed.
Right.
But after she was humiliated, defeated, and her prophets were killed, oh boy, you think she's hot under the collar now.
She says, may my life be like one of theirs if by this time tomorrow I don't kill you.
Yeah.
And the fact that Elijah took this seriously tells you this was no idle threat.
Yeah.
As diffident and as back and forth as Ahab tended to be, this woman was resolute. She was determined. She was a true representative of the prophets of Baal and her god Baal, and she's trying to catch Elijah. So here's the thing to take away from this. I think this is extremely important. On the cusp of his greatest victory, we see Elijah next, out running for his life, hiding in the wilderness, asking God to take his life. Isn't that amazing that on the heels of a tremendous triumph, he's ready just to give up? He says, I can't do this anymore. He says, and think about this, the great victory he won, he surely thought, this is going to turn the tide. Yeah. Now everything in the country is going to be different. We might have a change of leadership. Yeah. They still have two worthless leaders in Jezebel and Ahab. And it looks as if for all of his work, nothing has changed. Nothing is different. So Elijah asked the Lord to take my life. He said, am I better than my forefathers? I've done the very best I could. But they've killed all of the prophets. Okay. Baal still reigns in Samaria. Jezebel is still running the country. Why am I even wasting my time? It's all for nothing.
Yeah. I think one of the great passages is as wonderful as the showdown on the mountain is and theatrical as all of that. I think the highlight of this narrative, the story of Elijah, happens during that time as he's running and he's hiding and he's down and he's depressed. By the way, that points out, and we'll see this in other prophets, they are defined by their humanity. Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, their characteristics define their ministries, if you will. But here he is, afraid and downtrodden and depressed and just really asking God, hey, just take my life. And God tells him over in chapter 19 that you go and stand in the mouth of that cave. And then he had this series of progressions pass by. There was a storm,
But the Lord wasn't in the storm.
The Lord wasn't there. There was fire, Chuck.
But the Lord wasn't in the fire.
There was something else. Earthquake, mighty earthquake.
But the Lord wasn't in the earthquake.
But then there was a still small voice. And that voice spoke to, and we don't know if that's audible or if that was in his heart, but that voice spoke to the prophet and reassured him that I still am God and I still have thousands that have not bowed, their knee to the Baals. And so buck up, son. Take courage.
At the moment that he is ready to just give up and just walk away, the Lord has a message for him. He says, it's not going to be necessarily in the big splashy events of life where the greatest victories are going to come. It might be.
That's it.
In that small, still voice. And then the Lord gives him his marching orders. He says, look, Ahab's time is drawing to a close. He and Jezebel are done. They're just too dumb to know it. So you go announce that Hazael is going to be the next king. Ahab is done. By the way, you go and find this fellow by the name of Elisha, because when I bring you back home to me, he is going to pick up the mantle.
Carry on.
And he's going to carry on the work. And by the way, you keep saying you're the only one left. You're the only one left. I've reserved 7,000 prophets. There's that prophet again, who have not bowed the knee to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. You're not the only one left. And John, we get like that sometimes. Think about what COVID has done to so many people.
I think so.
There are some people that you haven't hardly been outside your house. Or if you have, you haven't been with your family, or you haven't been with your church family. And you feel like, man, I'm by myself. You're watching this right now at home, the way you've been watching all the church services for a year. And you're thinking, I'm the only one left. What would the Lord's message be to that one who's thinking that right now?
It may be the still small voice of the pigskin preacher. Wait a minute, he doesn't have a still small voice.
That
It may
that
be the
loud, big voice.
booming voice saying, now may be the time to come on back.
Get out of the cave and
Yeah.
come on back to the skating rink.
I mean, here we are in June, and we've gone more than a year. It was this time last year that we thought, okay, surely by now we first thought
Be over by Easter.
Yeah, but
You
by
meant
the
Easter.
summer.
You meant Easter of 2023.
Oh gosh, forbid. But now is the time as we turn the corner on a number of things. It does seem to be a more conducive time. Vaccinations are taking hold and things are getting better. We still need to be cautious and careful. But maybe the message of God that is tugging at all of our hearts, now is the time to re-engage, to cautiously move back toward normalcy. And we certainly would want you to do that and be a part of the services that are ongoing here at the Pinnacle Church of Christ. Our Sunday morning worship service is a very conducive atmosphere, and we're continuing to follow the guidelines for safety. But I think the challenge is for each one to decide for themselves if now is not the time to begin to make their way back.
Listen, it's going to be the time eventually. I mean, it's going to have to be. And we've tried to be very faithful in not imposing artificial deadlines on people. You got to come back here.
Right.
You'll figure that out for yourself. But here's the thing. You're going to have to figure it out sometime. As strong as Elijah was, he was at his lowest when he was by himself. And it's not a coincidence that the Lord told him, you go and be around other people. You be around those 7,000 prophets. You be around that man named Elisha, who's going to be your partner in ministry and who's going to help you. I mean, it's been a while, John, since the Lord said to Adam in the garden, it is not good for the man to be alone.
That's right.
Well, we can go ahead and borrow that quote and tell you it's not good for you to be alone, not indefinitely. We've had a year of this, or we've had 15 months of this. Eventually, it's going to be time to come back out. So we hope that you'll do that. We hope that you'll let the Pinnacle Church of Christ minister to you, because God did not put us in this spiritual family to be scattered to the four winds and never see each other. That's just not a good game plan for anyone going forward. So hopefully we can take the message of Elijah and recognize there are going to be in life some great victories. There are going to be some crashing lows. There are going to be times when we feel like we're on top of the world. And there are going to be other times we feel like, man, I've had it. I've done enough. I don't know that I can go on any longer. But when we feel like that, it's time to listen to that small, still voice of the Lord. And it's time to remember we were made to be in community with each other. John, lead us in a prayer.
You bet. Father God, we are truly thankful for the pages of this ancient text that we read that's so full of life and meaning for us. And help us to learn from the stories of Elijah and the other men of God who, against great odds, continued to be faithful, continued to trust you, and to launch out on your word. Help us, Heavenly Father, as we live lives for you, to always know that you are with us, guiding and directing us to do your will. Forgive us when we fall short. Give us a home in heaven with you when this life is over. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.